Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much. If you could take your seats, we're going to get started. Welcome. My name is Craig Cohen. I'm President and COO here at CSIS. Dr. Henry's so sorry not to be here. He took a little stumble this week and fell on his knee. He's totally fine, but he's not very mobile, so he's sorry not to be here. We are all here because we love and miss Andrew Schwartz, and we're going to get through this together, and we're going to hear a lot of wonderful memories of Andrew. We don't have a New Orleans brass band like there was at his amazing funeral, but we're going to try to bring his presence back with us today through these stories. So thank you all for coming. There's so many old friends. Thank you for being here. Alex Kisling was Andrew's deputy and now is going to step into his shoes. They're big shoes to fill, and he's going to take us through the program tonight. So Alex, why don't you come up here and
Well, good evening, everyone, and it's so wonderful to be with so many friends and colleagues tonight. And at CSIS, we all knew Andrew is an extraordinary colleague, but it's really special to have so many of his friends from across Washington and beyond. A lot of people flew in tonight. We have a lot of people watching online, so it's very special for all of you to be here. And I'm also really happy that we could spend this evening with Andrew's family, Amy and the boys, and Joe and Ann. It's really wonderful that you can be here with us, and I'm glad you can hear the reflections from so many friends with us tonight. We're gonna start a program with several guests who will come up here and offer remarks and reflections on Andrew's life. After which we're gonna open it up for the audience for anybody who would like to come up here and also offer remarks. We have a few seats held over here, so if you do want to deliver remarks, if you could make your way over there at some point during the program, then I'll call you up to the stage. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get started? And we could really think of nobody better to start this program than Andrew's longtime friend and mentor, co-collaborator, Bob Schieffer. Bob, it's an honor to have you with us tonight. Please come to the stage.
Thank you all so much. This is a day that I don't think any of us expected. And Andrew was one of the best friends I had. I want to speak first to Andrew's family, his wife Amy and their son, Benjamin, Eli, and Daniel. And I want to elaborate on what you already know, members of his family. Your dad loved you. I know that because I can't remember a single time I was ever with Andrew that he didn't mention you guys. The part you may not know is just how much those of us who worked with him thought of him. Andrew Schwartz was not just a good guy, he was a really good guy. He was not just a smart guy, he was a really smart guy, and he was someone we all looked up to and admired. He loved to mentor and to help the younger people he came to know, and some of the older ones too, including me, and he became one of the best friends I ever had. Writing a book with someone has ruined many a marriage, destroyed plenty of friendships, and ruptured more than one business relationship. But when Andrew and I collaborated on a series of podcasts that we turned into the book Overload in 2016, there's no other way to put it. We had a ball. It was a book about the changes that were coming or had already come to journalism and the impact they were having on the profession and, more importantly, on our nation. Changes that were so drastic, Dr. Hamre feared they were becoming a national security issue. Americans had once gotten all the information they needed to become well-informed citizens, mainly from the same sources, local newspapers, radio, and several national magazines. But suddenly, we were forced to rely on questionable and unfamiliar sources, some trustworthy, some not. Hundreds of local newspapers we had once depended on were no longer there. forced to shut down because of the advertising that had once been their life's blood was going to online publications. And it was all taking place in the midst of the nastiest and most unusual presidential campaign that I have ever experienced in my life, Trump versus Clinton. Before then, years of divisive, negative political campaigns had left our political system so toxic and so unappealing, our best and brightest people wanted no part of it. To Dr. Hamre, that was what posed the danger. If our people, he said, don't have a clear understanding of what our problems are and the threats we face, if they don't know where to look for solutions, that is a serious problem. Andrew and I set out with an old-fashioned idea and plan to change that. We would talk to as many people in journalism's positions of power as possible. We both took part in the podcast interviews, but I concentrated on the people from the legacy publications, the newspapers, the networks, and so on. Andrew guided us to the new folks in the news neighborhood, organizations with names like Axios, BuzzFeed, The Daily Beast, Huntington Post, Politico, and podcasts themselves, as well as the newest old thing, the newsletter. I would not have known, seriously, which ones to call or how to find them. To my good fortune, Andrew kept up with all of these organizations. He knew which ones did what, which could be trusted, and better still, the operators of these new organizations knew him, and that made it easier all around. For our book, he reviewed 77 of the sites, and we published what to expect and how to contact them. Without Andrew, our book would have been out of date in a matter of months. We didn't solve the problems, that's for sure, but we, at the least, helped people understand what was happening and where we were headed. Larry McMurtry, the famous author of Lonesome Dove and a stack of best-selling books and screenplays, was a friend of mine's friend, and he told me one time years ago when he was still teaching at Rice University, there is a difference between knowing something and understanding it. He used his rancher father as an example. If we want to know the temperature today, we can check dozens of sources. In his dad's era, you had to study the clouds and the winds and the land around you to understand what the climate was doing and what was happening. He had to make the right judgments, or his whole life didn't work. His means of making a living would have evaporated. I always thought, oddly enough, of Andrew when I thought of that. He had access to tons of information in his job here at CSIS, but with him, the process never stopped there. He didn't want to know something, he wanted to understand it. So he asked questions, which is what good reporters do, and he was such a good example to the young people around him. If I had to pick one word to describe Andrew, it would be enthusiasm, and not just about work, but about life. Andrew was one of the hardest working people I ever knew, and what made him fun to be around was the interest he had in so many things, not the least of which was music, mostly jazz, and specifically jazz that originated in New Orleans. I was raised on country music, as most people who know me know, but Andrew was a proud graduate of Tulane in New Orleans, and if ever there was a school and a student made for each other, it was those two. When he came to New Orleans, Andrew was interested in everything from gumbo to jazz. I am convinced, this is true, I am convinced I was never held higher in Andrew's esteem than when he discovered that I knew who New Orleans singer Clarence Frogman Henry was. The other day, on the anniversary of Katrina, CBS Sunday Morning ran a long piece on New Orleans jazz, and my first thought was not about the storm, but about Andrew, and that made me smile. I knew then it's not just words when someone says, "May his memory be a blessing." It is a blessing, and we're all the better for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I'd next like to welcome Kurt Campbell up to the stage. Thank you, Kurt.
Thanks very much, and thanks particularly to John Hamry and Craig and CSIS for putting this together to give us an opportunity to gather and remember a wonderful friend, Andrew. We were members, lifelong members of a community at a Quaker school, and although Quakerism is much smaller than it once was in the United States, they have some wonderful concepts. Concepts that sometimes when you reflect on them, you wish they were more present in your daily life. One of those is the idea of holding people in the light. And it's hard to describe exactly what that means. You sort of know it when you experience it, but I'd ask you all to hold Amy, Daniel, Ben, and Eli in the light. And you may not know what it means right now, but it means not just now, but into the future. Remember them, be a part of their lives. Remember Andrew in your daily life. I knew Andrew in 3 walks of my own life, and he made an impact in all of them. The first, as you've already heard from Bob, he was a remarkable professional. And he took a nascent program that did a little bit of outreach and public policy and press engagement and made it into a powerhouse. And what he did over the course of more than a decade and a half here was remarkable. And we saw it every day when we worked here. It was so important that when I left CSIS, I remember I was working at the State Department. If you're in government, sometimes you run into those moments where maybe things aren't going so good and how you're being referred to in various media outlets. And I was negotiating the release of some Chinese diplomat, and it was not going well, and I was getting some really bad stuff. And so I can remember, who should I call to help give me counsel, to calm me down, to give me a sense of perspective? And it was Andrew. Called him from Beijing, picked right up, got right in it, just very enthusiastic, as Bob said. My problem was his problem, helped me think through strategies, and of course his advice was spot on and perfect. And so he did a remarkable job professionally. He helped all of us. And he helped you no matter what walk of life you were in. No matter when I was working on one thing or another, he treated me the same always, and he treated everyone with a deep respect, something that I think we can all seek to exemplify in our own lives. The second way I know Andrew is something that has not come up very much before, but we were both very serious swimmers, and we both swam both in high school and college. And we both made up huge amounts of lies about our, I think maybe even me more than him, but we would often talk about how much we loved swimming and like how important it was to our lives and stuff like that. And we would meet up to swim often, and we'd say, "What are you going to do today?" And we'd be stretching out. "I'll do 2 miles today." Sometimes a little bit less. And so we were both we felt our best in the pool, and we really enjoyed it. And I think sometimes we got in the pool, there's sometimes, unfortunately, in pools, they put kind of mirrors, and you don't really want to see that you look a little different than you did in college, but still, it was a wonderful experience, and we always tried to encourage ourselves to get back in the pool and work. But he was as enthusiastic in the water as he was here at CSIS. The last memory I have of him, and the one that will stick with me, as Amy knows, we are proud members of Sidwell Friends School. His sons went there, my daughters went there. But the weird thing about high school now is that if you raise boys and you raise girls, they are completely different universes. You have absolutely no idea what those guys are doing. So I had daughters and he had sons, but I always noted he was always engaged in some endeavor with his sons and his friends in a way that was wonderful. He was incredibly his warmth of spirit and his ability to bring young folks in and get them excited about something was remarkable. But when I talk about what it meant to me, when you would arrive at school, and the thing about living in Washington, D.C., you rarely stop to reflect. You rarely stop and really take a moment to think about where you are, what really matters in the moment. And one of the wonderful things about Quakerism is that they ask you at the outset of any meeting to stop and reflect and think. And, usually you're always rushing, and it's very hard to actually get in the moment. But once you do, it's actually deeply moving and important. And I remember we were in the meeting hall at Sidwell Friends several years ago. All of our kids were, in various stages of school, and there was a choir performance, and we had sat in silence, and then a wonderful, very inspirational song about what it is to live in peace. And I looked across the way and I saw Andrew, and Andrew saw me. And this was an experience, being at school together, seeing our children raised in a wonderful spiritual way was deeply important to both of us and to our families. And our eyes just locked for a moment, and we smiled, and it was deeply moving. And when I heard the terrible news, I reflected on that moment of peace, and I wish Amy and her family to have that peace and to remember what a remarkable man Andrew was, how much joy he brought to all of our lives, and we will remember him forever. Thank you.
Thanks, Kurt. I'd next like to welcome Fiona Hill up to the podium.
Well, it's really wonderful to be here with all of you, although not under the circumstances we would wish for. And Andrew would love this, so let's all do him proud here. You'll see that there's a running theme, and for all of you here who know Andrew, it's no surprise, because when you're such a big, wonderful person like Andrew in all the dimensions of this, people pick up very quickly on what's your essence, what's the most amazing things about you. And like Kurt and like Bob, I've been blessed to know Andrew, and I've been doubly blessed. You appear to be triply blessed in ways that we didn't know. I knew Andrew swam, but I didn't know you swam, Kurt. So anyway, now I've learned something, and I can't get some of these images out of my mind of the two of you in the pool. But anyway, we'll move along from that. But first of all, of course, like everyone else from CSIS and from Brookings Institution up the road, I've known Andrew for actually 20 years. As a much beloved and deeply respected colleague in the think tank community. And although CSIS and Brookings sometimes do a little bit of competition, Andrew was renowned for being one of those amazing people who we all felt he was one of ours. And then second, and perhaps most importantly in many respects, just like Kurt and other people who are here today, I've known Andrew as a fellow parent at Sidwell Friends School for more than 12 years, because my daughter and Andrew's son Daniel were in kindergarten together. And we're friends all the way through graduation. I hope after graduation as well. So they go off to their various colleges. And Amy, Andrew's wife, is still listed in my contacts as my Rising K parent rep. So thank you very much, Amy. And Amy and Andrew have been, also for Kurt and Lael and for other people here, constant companions through the ups and downs of school life and countless back to school and parent events. And as many of you, probably did yourselves from the Sidwell community and others, I would always pull Andrew over to one side during those events for a moment to get an update on the latest developments in DC, not just our respective think tanks, before getting back to the main event of our kids and their progress through life. Amy and Andrew were great parents, and Andrew was just an amazing dad. And like Kurt said, I mean, all of us saw who were at Sidwell and saw him in all of those contexts, that he was a second father for so many people, for a large group of boys and now men around his sons. And I mean, all of you know that. Now, as Kurt has already said, there's going to be a little Quaker theme going on here because Sidwell is a Quaker school. My grandmother was actually a Quaker, so I've got a bit more of a connection to this than usually. And Andrew and Amy are not Quakers, but given the fact that all three of the sons of Ben and Eli and Daniel went to Sidwell Friends, they've had decades of their lives devoted to the school, its sports teams, and other extracurricular activities, of which there were numerous, and Andrew was at all of them as far as I could tell. He was certainly every one I showed up at, so he spent a lot of time there. And for those of you who might not know quite so much about Quakerism, the Quakers have values or testimonies that have a very nifty acronym, SPICES. Now, as a word in itself, it's something that also resonates when you think about Andrew. A very spicy zest for life, but it also links to food, something which Andrew was also known to have a great zest for. And at his funeral, for those of you who were there, which was wonderful, uplifting, heartfelt, and very funny, his sons gave some of the funniest speeches I've ever heard anywhere. Stand-up comedy was definitely a feature there, but spices of the Cajun variety ran all the way through the course of this, through the cuisine of New Orleans, through every little element of the funeral, and it just featured prominently. And obviously, if you think about spices in the Quaker context, it's not as rip-roarously funny or, uplifting. But it actually, I think, signifies things that Kurt has already started to say about Andrew, because spices for the Quakers are simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equality, and then the final S is stewardship. And Andrew epitomized every single one of these in the way that he lived his life. He loved life and he kept it simple because he put his family, his friends, and his colleagues first above everything else. And he was, of course, a peacemaker. He reached across every imaginable division, as Bob laid out already for us, to find consensus and emphasize communication. Communication was not just part of his job at CSIS, it was part of him. And Andrew was a really remarkable person, as we've already heard in that regard here in DC, because his inner and outer lives were the same. He modeled integrity. He treated others with respect and honesty, and by doing this, he created a community around him, a network of remarkable people that he viewed equally, be they a kid at his son's school, an intern at CSIS, Kurt's already talked about this, a DC-based politician, or a journalist, or a world leader. Everyone was equal to Andrew because he saw them as a person. And so, no matter what their background, as Kurt has already said, Andrew would treat them exactly the same way. And finally, that last S, stewardship, which really also means service. Everyone here knows someone that Andrew helped and guided in their lives. We just heard about how he helped Kurt at a very difficult time when he was in China, of all places. And every single person here knows someone who owes their job to their relationship with Andrew and to Andrew directly, or the resolution of a very difficult situation as a result of Andrew's personal intercession. Because Andrew went out of his way, no matter who you were, what background you were, as Kurt already said, to help others. It was part of what he did in the think tank community, it was part of his life, and it was just as meaningful as his policy contributions. So as Kurt has already mentioned the word of light and the thought of light, Andrew Schwartz was a guiding light. He was a wise and a loving presence in all of our lives. And that idea of light is just as important in the Jewish faith as in the Quaker tradition. And as Kurt has already said, let's all hold Andrew and all of the Schwartz family in the light together. And although I know I speak for others here, DC's a lot less bright without him. I was actually going to say dim. It's dimmer without him. And then I thought that didn't go well, the thought of it. So, but it's less bright. If Andrew was here, it would be a much brighter place. And it's a lovely day outside. So this is really for Andrew. And I'm really grateful, as I know every single one of his friends are too, be able to share thoughts with him and to honour him and honour his memory. And he would love an open mic. So please, all of you come up and say something. Thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you, Fiona. Next, I'd like to welcome Nancy Youssef up to the stage.
I want to thank CSIS for putting this event together and for all of us gathering here to remember Andrew. I'd like to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about what Andrew meant to me. I imagine everyone in this room subscribes in some measure to the axiom that a life unexamined is not worth living, that everyone here is on some kind of personal journey to lead a better life. Maybe you're trying to drink less or exercise more, do better. If you'd indulge me, I'd like to share what I'm doing as my own personal journey. I'm trying to manage feelings around anger. I'm angry about the injustices all around us. I know that life is unfair, and too often I resent it. But I also know that such feelings aren't useful. And so I'm trying to combat that anger. And that effort has led me to all sorts of readings, philosophical ones. And the one I'll talk to you about today is Stoicism. If you initially go on this path, you'll find yourself inundated with aphorisms. You should control your thoughts. We're all flawed, so try to think about things from another person's perspective. See the good in others. Practice gratitude. Dig a little deeper, and you discover that the most prolific Stoic thinkers crafted these ideas by studying people around them. There were basically two kinds of people that shaped their thinking. Those that they didn't want to be like, Nero, for example, or those they wanted to be just like. And so now I, too, find that I've become more aware of those who are around me and what I can learn from people in my life. And Andrew, for me, was the anti-Nero. The kind of person I looked at and wanted to be, who offered wisdom through his actions, who exuded happiness and an appreciation for every gift afforded to him. I met Andrew shortly after I returned back from living 4 years on and off, reporting in a war zone. It was so jarring to come back to the comforts of normalcy after years of living in and writing about ubiquitous suffering. I met Andrew through our work, he here at CSIS and I as a Pentagon correspondent. One day he proposed lunch, and I was immediately struck by his energy. He exuded gratitude, not because he'd survived a war zone, but because he fully loved the life given to him. We ended up lunching regularly, and my favorite part was not to talk about the state of the world, but to listen to him talk about his sons and his family, to see the pride that he carried for them. The Stoics would say we should be free of intense, destructive feelings and full of love instead. That was Andrew to me. He loved his family. He loved his work. He loved Tulane. He loved music. And through him, you love them too. When I returned from Egypt with a dear Egyptian colleague of mine, who's a sister to me, Amina, he invited us to speak at the Schieffer series in Texas. And Andrew was the best ambassador to the United States I could have asked for. He made Amina feel like a longtime friend, not a passing visitor. We rode in a limousine for the first time, which Andrew arranged and we loved. And his love of our work and his appreciation for it made us love our craft and made us feel that the sacrifices we'd made to report about Arab Spring feel worthwhile. In the years that followed, I would call Andrew, usually in a panic, deadline-driven fury, and ask for help on a story. And every time he greeted my calls so warmly, the way someone who loves you lights up and smiles every time you walk into the room. Sometimes our exchanges were only a few minutes long, but I always felt better after them. He always delivered because he was great at his craft, and he did it in a spirit of kindness. Andrew was such a unique presence in Washington, a reminder that we don't have to be consumed by the global injustices we study and write about. If we just live a life of gratitude for the gifts we have every day, right here in our homes, in our jobs, at our city. It reflected in his approach to his work. He was both incredibly politically savvy and above the partisanship of our era. Andrew's spirit was so consistently joyful that I came to assume that it would always be there. It's one of the many reasons his passing hurts so much. It was too soon, and it comes at a time when we need people like Andrew more than ever. I'm not the only person battling feelings of anger. It's all around us. So much anger. How do we let go of it? The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, a leading Stoic thinker, once said, "The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts." Andrew's legacy to me, in addition to making us better thinkers through his work, was to show us how much we could do when we decide to think about life differently. Each one of us, like Andrew, can be leaders in our field and at the same time guided through our character. These days when I start to feel angry, including that Andrew was taken too soon, when I start searching for ways to combat those feelings, when I seek to live and examine life, I know I don't have to lean on the wisdom of those who lived hundreds of years ago. I think of Andrew and how he lived, and I feel grateful that I had the honor of being introduced to a special person who not only lived a good life, but taught us how to live a good life too. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Next, I'd like to welcome Dimitri Sevastopoulos.
Good afternoon, everyone. And first, to John Hamry, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about Andrew. And to his family, my deepest condolences to you and to the CS family. Can I just say that after listening to Fiona, I too was struggling to get the image of Kurt and Andrew in the swimming pool out of my brain. And now after listening to Nancy, I have Marcus Aurelius in the pool too. And I feel like maybe I've had a drink. Just to get those images out of your mind, and I hadn't intended to say this, where Kurt and Andrew spent their best years in the pool, Andrew and I spent our best years in the bar. Most likely the Jefferson bar, and I would love to see what his whiskey bill was racked up over the years, but I never asked. I met Andrew 2 decades ago. I had just arrived in Washington. My memory's a little hazy, but I'm pretty sure I had called him up to ask for an introduction to an Asia expert. And no, it wasn't Kurt Campbell. It was either Mike Green or Victor Cha. And I'm sure Mike would have loved to have been here, but the good news for the family is the fact that Mike isn't here means you don't have to listen to the bagpipes in addition to all of us, as beautiful as they are. You know, I was a rookie reporter, and I genuinely knew nothing about Washington. I didn't know much about reporting either. And Andrew and I were the same age, and I was super impressed at how he seemed to understand this city in ways that it frankly took me a long time to get my head around. And as many of you who've been here for a long time, I'm not sure we ever really get our head around Washington, but he had an understanding and an enthusiasm that everyone has talked about. You know, he was a consummate professional. Listening to everyone, it's pretty clear that that was one of his his skills. But he had something else. He had a level of confidence that I think is often lacking. When he would introduce me to people at CSIS, he would then let me develop relationships with them. He would trust, I don't know why he trusted me, but more importantly, he trusted them. He trusted his team to arrange things. He didn't try and micromanage. He just let us get on with it, which sounds like a small thing, but actually it's quite rare, particularly in my business. And if you think over the past 20 years, if I look back at the number of think tanks that I've quoted in Washington, and I hope Fiona won't give me that Northern English stare for saying this, CSIS has definitely outperformed everyone else. And that's testament to Andrew and the way he let his people blossom and let them go out for drinks and lunch with me. I think his confidence was also reflected in the fact that John Hamry clearly put a huge amount of confidence in Andrew and trusted him, and you could really see that. And, you know, I remember when I was here in the early years, again, didn't really understand Washington. I grew up in Dublin, Ireland. It's a small place. We don't have any kind of big wigs except for our musicians, which Andrew would love. But Andrew arranged a lunch with Dr. Hamry, with John. And I was hugely grateful. I mean, for me, it was a massive deal to go for lunch with a former Deputy Secretary of Defense. I mean, I had no idea what the Deputy Secretary of Defense did. No disrespect, Kath. But it sounded very impressive. And obviously, over time, I understood why. But I couldn't understand why Dr. Hamry would go for lunch with me. I was probably a 31-year-old Irish guy. I honestly knew nothing. But Andrew had arranged it. And over time, I think I unraveled the mystery. And a lot of that unraveling happened over whiskeys after Jefferson, sometimes with John there as well. And I realized that the reason that Andrew was able to persuade John to go for lunch with somebody he'd never heard of was Andrew was actually John's boss. To Andrew's family, to all of you, he was a really fun guy who will be remembered extremely fondly by everyone, that's clear. And I hope right now he's somewhere up there with a drink in his hand, looking down, saying, I love you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimitri. I'd like to welcome Tom Shaker to the stage.
Thank you all, and a special thanks to Dr. Hamry for this opportunity. Andrew was one of the first people I reached out to when I arrived on the Pentagon beat a long time ago. And over the next decade and a half, he became the indispensable man to me, as he did to so many other national security reporters who are here today to honor his memory. Andrew was extremely knowledgeable without ever being a know-it-all. He had a sharp wit, no sharp elbows. He was a disciplined gatekeeper who also knew how to be a very clever reporter whisperer to guide us on important stories. He was a master of his profession and always had an open hand and an open mind to help others. And in a town where too many people define themselves as what I do is who I am, Andrew was always ever so much more than just the job. He loved music. He loved food. He loved a good laugh. He loved his family so very, very dearly. And most of all, he believed that a well-informed citizenry is vital to our democracy. And he used every tool at CSIS to accomplish that, to try to repair the world, try to make the world a better place, to try to make the world a safer place. Before we began, I was reminiscing with the great Bob Schieffer about our early years in journalism. Bob and we shared our first job in journalism was as night police reporter. Bob in Texas, me in Oklahoma. Now, if you don't know, Oklahoma is smack dab in the middle of Tornado Alley. And one of my early night editors liked to say, no matter what your beat in this town, you are a storm chaser. That's also true of every reporter in this town as well. We're chasing storms, war, politics, the economy, injustice. So Andrew also was a weather forecaster, helping the press corps understand what big stories were around the corner or just over the horizon, ready to blow in. And he also provided shelter from the storm, a safe harbor to discuss story ideas, sharpen story ideas, improve story ideas. And you always knew that your scoops were secret until you hit the publish button. So yes, Andrew was the indispensable man. And there's a perfect word for him. And of course that word is Yiddish. Andrew was a mensch. And that is quite a legacy. We news people are always quoting, misquoting, and rebranding the words of the famous. Churchill, Twain, Aristotle, Lincoln, Marx, Groucho, not Carl, I know what town we're in. So I will do the same in a way that I think Andrew would appreciate. A few weeks back, when Ringo Starr turned 85, a reporter asked Paul McCartney, the only other surviving member of the Beatles, for comment. And Sir Paul said this, "He is Ringo and nobody else is." And so to his family, friends, and colleagues, I'm sure you would agree that it is truly accurate to paraphrase Sir Paul and say, he is Andrew Schwartz and nobody else is. Zichrona livracha, May his memory be for a blessing. Thank you.
One of Andrew's dearest friends in Washington was David Sanger. David is traveling this week, but he was kind enough to record some remarks earlier this week. So if we could cue that, we'll hear from David. After David's remarks, we'll open it up for open mic. So if you want to give some remarks, please make your way over to the side of the stage, and we'll have you come up.
I'm David Sanger of the New York Times and a friend of Andrew's for more than 20 years. I'm sorry not to be with you in person today to celebrate the remarkable life of Andrew Schwartz, who brought so much joy and understanding and depth to all of our lives. I teach a class of graduate students in national security on Thursday afternoons, and I could hear Andrew in my head saying, "Rabbi," he always called me and many others by that moniker, whether it fit or not, "we need to get the next generation ready. Don't miss class." And that, of course, is exactly what Andrew did. He was always getting the next generation ready. With his podcasts, with his mentoring, with his depth of knowledge inside CSIS, and his enthusiasm for spreading its work around the world. He not only lived in the moment, he prepared the rest of us for the next moment. A broadcast journalist by training, he never stopped thinking like a reporter. What's coming next? Everyone here who knew and loved him was struck, I suspect, as I was, at how encyclopedic his mind was. But Andrew was no policy wonk. He was too joyful for that. And he took that joy in the give and take that once was Washington. A place to debate ideas, argue about policy, muse together on how a well-intentioned effort went off the rails and a badly designed program worked anyway. Whether he was organizing his podcasts or the Schieffer series or a CSIS briefing, his enthusiasm was always infectious. For his friends, this was a lift. Rarely did a week go by without my hearing from Andrew on a new idea, a new report, a thought about how I could improve my coverage of Washington. He had a lot of thoughts in that last category, and most of them were right. Andrew had a lot of loves, but they all started with Amy, Benjamin, Eli, and Daniel. Over lunch, he would tell me about their adventures or recount the details of his latest trip to New Orleans and Tulane. How a guy from Silver Spring and Cleveland got to love the French Quarter remains a mystery. But ask me anything about Tulane football, 20 years of lunches with Andrew has given me a lifetime of knowledge. Of course, it was his pride in Amy and the boys that shone through in every conversation. It was with them he wanted to spend every minute, and seeing him on the field at Sidwell was a reminder of the depth of his love for them and his wonderful father, Joseph, who I've only gotten to know recently as we shared in this tragedy. Andrew was also a raconteur in the best and most old-fashioned use of the term. In my mind's eye, he'll always be at that table at the Jefferson, just around the corner from CSIS, with that big, deep laugh and that ready smile. Andrew left us way too early. All of us thought we had a lifetime of lunches and laughter and podcasts and details about Tulane ahead of us. But he also showed us the way, how to debate policy with civility, how to disagree without hate, how to bolster a democracy at a time we see it being eroded every day. For that and for the way he lived his life, Andrew's memory is truly a blessing.
Well, I want to thank all of our speakers, and as I mentioned, we'll open up the microphone now if anybody wants to deliver remarks. Neil Urwitz, please.
Andrew taught me to never be shy. I started working for Andrew when I was 19. I'm turning 42 tomorrow, so you guys can do the math. I've relied on him for longer than I haven't. Obviously, I think of him as a mentor, as a friend, as a funny person, as a long-suffering Orioles fan like myself. But most of all, I think of him as the person who bailed me out so many times. Sometimes it was somebody else's fault. Most of the time it was mine. I remember, or I should say my job when I first started for him was to set up, those people over there, the national security reporters, with the experts who are spread out throughout this crowd. And that required a sense of timing, which I had, and a sense of grace, which I did not, and still don't, if I'm being brutally frank. And I remember first his ability to stand up for his team. I had screwed something up. There was one of our experts who was supposed to go on live TV. Timing, for whatever reason, got screwed up. And the producer called him furious and said, I don't appreciate your ruining my broadcast. And he right away said, I don't appreciate you ruining my team, and hung up. He stood up for me there, and I never forgot that. When I was first coming out of college, after having worked for him, and I stayed in touch with him during college, there was an organization, I won't name it, that I wanted to work for. He very, very forcefully told me, Neil, don't do that. That's not going to go well. You don't want that to be your first job. And not only did he give me that incredibly critical advice, he made it so that I could follow it by hiring me. I believe I was his first hire here as a full-time employee, and that really got me off to the races. The most notable time, I should say, that he bailed me out was when I was rushing to get Dr. Quartersman. There was a reporter who desperately needed to talk to him, to Dr. Quartersman. So I saw Andrew, Dr. Quartersman, and a guy whose back was to me were all talking. With my normal sense of calm and patience, I ran up to him and said, Dr. Quartersman needs you right now, such and such really needs to talk to you. And then out of the corner of my eye, see whose back was to me. It was Sam Nunn. At the time, the chairman of our board, and I might as well have interrupted the Pope. The blood rushes from my face. I'm 24. As the totem pole goes, he's up here and I'm below the flowers. I figured I was about to lose my job. Andrew, without missing a beat, goes, "Want to get away?" Tension breaks. I don't get fired. We were on the elevator later. Sam Nunn, to his great credit, said, so son, what do you do here? And I was like, well, until about 10 minutes ago, I worked in our media team. It's funny, I need Andrew to bail me out once more. I'm not gonna lie, over the last 6 weeks, whatever it's been, I've been struggling with this. And the person that I would talk to about it is the one person who wouldn't hear. That stings a lot. And I guess I just have to get used to the fact that it's gonna sting for a while. I forget who it was who said at his funeral that grief is the price we pay for love. And I've just had to keep that close. The grief I feel now was worth it for the 23 years that I got with him. Thanks.
Thank you, Neil. Next up is somebody that Andrew is so proud of, the director of the CSIS Ideas Lab, Emma Cantley.
I'm going to keep this short to keep myself together, but hello, my name is Emma Cantley, and I worked for Andrew for nearly 8 years as part of the External Relations Department leadership team. I think something many of us do is take the time we have with those we admire and value for granted. I know I have. I don't think we do it consciously, but I think we get wrapped up in the day-to-day grind, and taking the time to process the lessons learned from those you look up to is not always at the forefront. While it is an unfortunate reality that during times of loss is typically when this type of reflection and gratitude surface, it is also a beautiful opportunity to celebrate and honor. Everyone in this room admired and valued Andrew for so many profound reasons. Since his passing, I have been reflecting on the impact he has had on my life. I'd like to take a moment to thank him for that. Andrew, thank you for being the mentor of a lifetime. Thank you for believing in me, for championing me, and for trusting me. You taught me what it means to be a strategic and thoughtful manager, what it looks like to be a true mentor. You modeled what it meant to be innovative and entrepreneurial. You showed me that relationship building was the foundation of all strong partnerships. You showed me what it meant to have your team's back and to protect them and to take ownership over missteps. You demonstrated what it looked like to have a fulfilling, energizing career while also always putting your family first. I owe my entire professional life to you, and I am forever grateful that you took a chance on me when you hired me as an intern. We will honor you in the way we continue to strive to push boundaries, experiment, and collaborate. I know your impact on our team as a whole and as individuals will live on forever. Thank you for being the mentor of a lifetime.
Louis Lauder, please join us.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Amy Boyce. I'm Louis Lauder. Worked for Andrew. Ran his congressional relations operation for a number of years. Miss Andrew very much, as we all do. So there's so much to say, of course, about his impact on this institution, on this town. So much of it has been said. For me, it's more of a personal impact. His most profound impact has been personal. As a mentor, as a friend, as my big Jewish brother. Andrew is only was only 10 years older than me. Sort of like my stalking horse for life. Everyone should have one of these people in their lives where you can sort of see your future in them. Whether it's that story of coming to Washington, trying to make a difference, settle down, build a family, build a career, make an impact. He was my person, for that. On balance, I would say the conversation definitely leaned more towards the family side. And we don't know each other super well, but heard so much about you over so many years, and you're very much in my heart. Wonderful dad. He just gave me quite a few pointers, lots of great advice. So what I always love most about Andrew, and this has been said, is that he was a man of great enthusiasms. He always lived in the moment. Impulsive, maybe a little impulsive, but that's what we loved about him. So the first time we met was when I actually interviewed here. It was the spring of 2008. Was looking to leave the Hill and do something new, and this was a great opportunity to come here and work on congressional affairs at this great institution. And I was obviously very nervous going in. For those of you in the tribe, you all know about Jewish geography. Many others probably know it as well. And for some reason, we just sort of launched into discussing folks we knew. And turns out he knew my grandmother. He met my grandma, and he loved my grandma. Whatever that interaction was, it worked out great. And within about 3 minutes, I knew I had the job. I was like, there is no debate at all. So luckily it worked out. I was able to bust through that expectation. With Andrew, you always could see that spark of enthusiasm. I felt it in that moment, in that interview. When discussing politics, you felt it. Obviously, when discussing music, you felt it. And I'm also a big Grateful Dead fan, as Andrew is, and we kept talking about the Dead for many years, up to just before his death. And actually, we're talking about this. There's a great club called Garcia's in Chicago. I've been there. It's awesome. If you haven't been yet, you've got to go check it out. I know your dad wanted to take you there. Of course, food. There's a lot of talk about, the Jefferson and the Palm, where there's a wonderful painting of Andrew on the wall. If you haven't seen it, make sure you sit at that table. It's very cool. For us, it was more kind of lowbrow stuff. Remember when Bub and Pop's opened up in this neighborhood? You guys, that's the best sandwich shop in DC. Sadly, it moved. It's no longer in this neighborhood. But that first week it opened up, Andrew had to try it. And as usual, I was a partner in these enthusiastic meal journeys. And I still remember just sitting in this small little sandwich shop with our chicken Parmesan sandwiches sitting in front of us, and that smile and excitement in his face. It ruined the rest of our day. I mean, we definitely had a food coma. That was it. But that's really, what I'll take with me with Andrew. And when you have those enthusiasms bubble up, there's an opportunity to think about him and how he would have reacted in that moment. And given his wide interests and passions and commitment, not only to this country, but to people, there's so many ways to do that. So I certainly will, and have been since he left us. And I hope you will too. So may his memory be a blessing. Thanks.
He's 10 feet taller than me. Thank you, Louis. Steve Morrison, please.
I knew Lou's grandmother also. And she was extraordinary. And he talked about her a lot. Amy, Daniel, Ben, Eli, Joseph, my condolences, but also my gratitude to you all for what you gave us and your own love and engagement and Andrew. We grew up together. Andrew and I grew up together here. And when we came into this building, he embarked on this mission to transform this place into the digital era. And he never really told us what his plan was. He just did it. And before you knew it, there was this explosion of things happening on social media, on broadcast capabilities, on a podcast series, and suddenly all these people started showing up, and they had all these different skills, and they were very young, and they were extremely creative and energized, and it just began to transform the institution and to get us to think differently and act differently and be differently. And it was all Andrew. And as I said, I don't think he ever told anyone, this is going to cost a lot of money. I don't think he told anyone, there'll be about 40 people up there working soon. But when I think back on the impact that he had on me, it was a brotherly sort of impact over many years of friendship, but it was also things that I never would have done here if it hadn't been for him and the transformation that he started here. In 2015, we were working on the Ebola crisis, and we kept bringing these people in from the administration and others in the international response, and we were tracking it, and we were traveling out to West Africa. And Andrew said, let's make a documentary. There was an explosion of fear across America. There was crisis in Dallas. There was all sorts of things happening in Atlanta and elsewhere within the United States. And out of that came a documentary, Ebola in America, Epidemic of Fear. And it was just a remarkable piece of work that would never have happened if he hadn't said, you must do this and we will figure it out. And he would bring in these young talents to help with the scripting and the filming and the sound. And we were traveling around talking to people across America on this. And we got out of our building, and we went out and we did that. 2 years later, he asked me, could you come meet someone? I have a friend who's a filmmaker, Justin Kenny. They had been partners together for a number of years, previous job. And I said, fine. And I went and met this man upstairs who's an award-winning filmmaker in a transition in his own life at that time. And we sat down and Andrew introduced us. And then at the end of it, I was like, okay, Andrew, what am I supposed to do now? He said, make a film. So we did. We made The New Barbarianism, which was a documentary about violence against the medical sector in Yemen, in Afghanistan, in Syria, and it went on to win all sorts of awards. When the pandemic started in January, February of 2020, we sat down and we talked and decided, well, let's join together and do a podcast series that tries to capture the experience of as many different parts of America and beyond America of what this means, because this is such a profound, fearful, profound thing that's going to change so many people's lives. So we agreed to do that. And from February 20th of 2020 until February of 2022, we did 165 episodes of that podcast, which are now in the National Archives. I never would have done that without Andrew. So I just want to bring those forward because I think he had this kind of transformative impact on so many of us in forcing us to think differently and act differently and work with him in all of these things. So I just want to thank him. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Steve. Andrew's first intern at CSIS, Josh Gross.
Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Gross. I was Andrew's first intern. I'm going to tell you a story that's really about me, but it's actually about Andrew, and it's probably about a lot of people who crossed Andrew's path here at CSIS. I moved to DC in 2005. I didn't know much about Washington, didn't know anybody. Somebody told me I should apply to an internship at CSIS. I don't know what that is, but sure. Fill out the form, send out the resume, get an internship. Terrific. Wasn't paid. Hopefully that's changed by now. So I found myself every morning, wake up early, jump on the bus, go to 18th and K, work real hard, leave early, 4 o'clock, go to my shift at Mercado, which is a restaurant in Logan Center that's not around anymore. Rinse and repeat day after day. And, Andrew, he's no like, what's the term, like wilting violet. He's like, he's a manager. So he'd be like, gross, get in here. And so I would, every morning come in with notebook and, whatever brilliant idea he had, I write it down, and we'd try to figure out how to make it happen over the course of the day. And this is before he had Neil and Lou and all these other really talented people sort of in this massive team, right? It was just kind of him and a few others. And it was a real whirlwind. The first couple of weeks that I was there were two things that I remember in particular. One, Christopher Hitchens mentioned CSIS on Bill Maher. It was a really big deal. Everyone was talking about it. And the other was Katrina. And, Katrina was horrible, but I didn't grow up in New Orleans. I didn't have a connection to that place. There are a lot of terrible things that happen every day. And seeing Andrew really brought home to me the bubble that I was living in and how lucky I was not to have to encounter those things day to day. And he was so angry. He would just yell at the television and say things like, there's so many smart people in this building. Why can't anybody do anything about this? It was so unconscionable to him that tragedy would unfold in the way that it did. And, that was kind of, I think, for him and for a lot of people who make their lives here in DC, that was like the rocket fuel that made him go, that made him wake up and think about, okay, clearly we can fix some of this stuff. And clearly there's no shortage of intelligence and talent, so let's do it. Let's find a way that we can do it. So my internship goes on, and toward the end, there was some scholar who will remain unnamed who was like, hey, do you want to bartend at my New Year's party? And I, sure, I'll bartend, make some extra money. And it's the end of the night, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, and everyone's leaving, and I'm just thinking to myself, like, I got to get out of here. What the hell am I doing with my life? Like, this is not a long-term gig. And I eventually found my way and found my professional path. My first job, as I was sort of transitioning from CSIS to my sort of first gig, my father asked me, he was like, well, did you learn much while you were at your internship? And I said, I don't know. Like, I had a good boss, but it was, I was running all over the place. I couldn't really answer in the moment. But what I found at that job and every role that I've had subsequently is that every time I encountered something that I was totally unprepared for and felt completely vulnerable and unable to rise to that particular occasion, there was something that Andrew had imparted, something that I had seen him do just through osmosis that gave me the confidence that I needed and gave me kind of a North Star to pursue and excel. And that wasn't just the case for the year or the 2 years after that internship. It was for the last 2 decades. And in that time, I've gotten married. I have 2 children. I've heard all about you guys. You probably don't remember, but he brought me home for a Jewish holiday 19 years ago. And I was having lunch with Eli a few weeks ago, and I realized, oh my God, it's all this time has passed, and now I'm probably around Andrew's age when I first met Andrew, and I have young kids, and he had young kids, and now there are these young people who I have a responsibility for, who are entering this really scary job market with AI and the state of the nation being what it is. So I have to pay it forward. I have to sort of do what Andrew would do and be a role model to people. I don't feel like ready for that, but I'm going to try. And I'm sure that Neil and Alex and all these people and all the unnamed people that he's mentored along the way, dozens and dozens and dozens, are also going to do the same and going to pay it forward in that way. And like, we have a common bond now that connects us. And there are lots of these networks in Washington of people who have some, point of connection, some, kind of beating heart that is their form of Jewish geography, right? And so Andrew is that to us. And in that spirit, because Andrew also, taught me and others that there's no shame in being shameless. Eli, he's got an internship right now, but he's going to be on the market in a few months. So you want somebody, could be a great junior associate, real go-getter, sitting right there. Go talk to him during the happy hour. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Our final speaker is Brandon Schwartz, who I just learned was Andrew's longest serving intern. So,
that was true only by the grace of Andrew. Enough said. Amy, Joe, Ann, Ben, Daniel, Eli. As you know, we've all been mourning together. Nobody more than you, nobody more grief-stricken than you. But several of us in this room have been, Neil, certainly, right there with you, crying a lot because Andrew meant the world to us. And Andrew's memory it's been a blessing, it is a blessing, it will always be a blessing, and we'll always remember him. I'll be speaking about him for many years. And so I'll start now. My first assignment as an intern, Ryan Sickles is laughing over there. One of the gentlemen with, a bald gentleman over there, handsome bald gentleman over there, was my first direct supervisor here at CSIS, and Andrew was, of course, our boss. So the first assignment was that the child development program, something like that, had come out with data, collected data all around the world. It was the first time anyone had done it. And so Andrew was going to give the opening remarks for this event to show this. And so I spent hours chugging Diet Coke, coming up with these opening remarks and looking at the information and trying to get smart on this. And I handed a sheet kind of like this to Ryan, and he took it down with Andrew, and they went in the back. And then they came up later, and I said to Ryan, how'd it go? And he knew I was watching on the webcast, and he felt really bad, and he put his hand on me, like palmed my whole shoulder, and he goes, we were reading it in the back, and Andrew looked at it, and he said, this is good stuff. And then they walked out to the stage, and it was totally not the right scenario to be giving these things. He said, but you did a great job, and we liked it. So that was a lesson in leadership from Ryan and a lesson in saying the right thing at the right time from Andrew. My name, as I said before, is Brandon Schwartz. Some of you, I had the pleasure of being some of your colleagues for several years here at CSIS. I was here for 3.5 years. It's about 10% of my life, and during that time I had the fun and exhilarating experience of being with Andrew 5 days a week. It was one of frankly, it was, other than now, the greatest time of my life. It was the most interesting, and thanks to many of you. Andrew starting very early on, called me Bubby, and he never quite quit. I would reciprocate. I think it was, he also would sort of refer to himself as my big brother. I would usually say more like an older cousin of sorts, but I called him Achi, which is essentially Hebrew, more or less, for bro. And he merited it, and there were many times in my life where he performed the duties that only a big brother would perform, and only someone who had genuine love. For the past 12 years of my life, nearly all the good things that have happened are a direct or one or two hops away from being attributable to Andrew. I met my best friends here at CSIS. Alex is somewhere over here, or maybe he's with my goddaughter, Emmy. Donna is over there, who, despite having opposing views for 10 years, has continued being my friend, and Max, who just had a baby. But so I grew up here at CSIS. I came here, I was very rough around the edges, and I left slightly smoother, all of which was due to Andrew's professional encouragement. Over that time, obviously in the past 12 years, there have been hard times too, but in all of those instances, every single one of them, I could call Andrew, and he was there for me. He picked up the phone and he said, I got this guy we can call. I know this person over at DOJ. I know this person. And he would take on whatever was, grieving me. He was more upset, right? He would go, oh, and he would use colorful language about it. It was a real, Joe, apologies. It was an F them. Who do they think they are? And that gives you total confidence. I'm now an attorney in the government, and I now have it's a strange feeling because I feel less insulated without Andrew, actually. Sometimes you have to give unpopular advice. You say, what's the conclusion? And I always had this ace in the hole where I said, worst case scenario, I call Andrew and he'll figure it out. He'll make some phone calls. And so I'll have to figure that one out. But I will, for several years, rumors have swirled because we share a last name, and people have thought over the years that we were related. I immediately saw the benefits in people thinking that was the case. So I never lied. I never lied, but I would never, proactively. But so I figured I'd give you the real story on how we met, which is all to say a very deep, profound thank you to Amy, because without Amy, I would not know Andrew, and all of these good things wouldn't have happened, and I also wouldn't have known all of you. But so we'll take it to music. So when Bruce Springsteen was giving the introductory remarks for inducting Bob Dylan into the Rock Hall in 1988, he said that he was sitting in the car with his mom, he was listening to music, and on came the snare shot that opened the door to my mind to rock and roll, right? And that was Like a Rolling Stone by Bob Dylan. Andrew, who I met in November of 2013, kicked open the door of my mind to bigger issues, bigger things than I ever thought I could be involved in. I was narrowly focused. I was a student at GW, and he, just as Neil sort of said, he broadened the horizons. And then he also kicked open the door to CSIS, which I'll tell you how that came about. So there's another very important person in this room, who's Dr. Jeffrey Ponsky from Cleveland, Ohio, who the only person above Andrew in my book, because Dr. Jeff Ponsky is one of the world's renowned physicians, recently retired, and he saved my mom's life when she had stage 4 cancer when I was a baby. The greatest man on the planet. And the other things that he's done with the PEG tube and with other things, you wouldn't believe, people, everybody in he's the most humble guy. He's blushing, but everybody in DC says, I did this, and they claim credit. He doesn't do that, but the lives he's saved and the people he's helped is just the most remarkable thing. He's really is one of the great Americans to ever live. So in 2007, I met his son, Lee Ponsky, who has a nonprofit. We were down in Honduras helping people with medical issues, and Lee became my mentor. And then fast forward, I'm in college. I transferred to GW from Miami of Ohio. I don't know anybody in DC. I reach out to Lee and I said, hey, here's this thing you should do with your nonprofit, bring more money in. And he said, yeah, that's great, I'll get them on it, but how are you doing? And I said, I'm doing well. I've applied to these think tanks and, I'm looking at government things. I'll let you know the result. And he goes, oh, my cousin's husband is like a huge guy at this think tank. What's your email? And I was like, oh my God, thank God, right? Because honestly, I hadn't applied to anything. I was like, I had nothing to put on the resume. There's nothing to put on the resume. But so Amy connects us via email. And but I don't know, by the way of the email, I couldn't tell if it was Amy or Andrew. And she goes, Brandon, you're emailing Amy, not Andrew. It's like, you're so young and not like these guys, right? These guys, see what Andrew and Amy did, and their grandparents, is they ensured that they were educated to a certain level and exposed them to the world. So these guys are polished. I was rough. But so I look into CSIS and I say, I'm looking at it and I go, wow, this is like incredible and so far out of my league, right? This is not gonna happen. And so I had a plan. I said, what's my ask, right? And so I said, I'm gonna ask him to connect me to some lesser think tank, not the Brookings Institution, which is a fine institution that I also was not qualified to work for. But so I go in with that in mind. And I didn't want to be too stuffy. I only owned one suit. And so I almost didn't put it on. And I said, I'm going to put on the suit, but I don't want to look like I'm really asking for something, so I won't put on the tie. And then I walk in November 13th of 2013, and I'm the only guy in the whole building without a tie on. But so Andrew and I, we got to talking. We sort of mostly talked about Bob Dylan. We talked about music, and we just hit it off. And he was really nice, and he said, look, I'm happy to introduce you to those folks over at those think tanks. I'm even happy to introduce you to Chaim Malka over in the Middle East program, John Alterman, both formerly, I think, in the Middle East program now. And he said, but you should really come work for me. I said, oh, he's being nice. So I said, thank you, but I didn't take him up on it. 5 more minutes pass, and he says it again. He goes, look, okay, I'll do it, but I think you should really work for me. It'll be, John, there you are, be, to broaden you out, it'll be great. And I can mentor you. And it was the smartest thing I ever said was, you know what, I think I'd prefer that. Let's do that instead. He said, great. And then Namio did what I would now call a perfunctory interview, that she treated like a real interview but at any rate, she asked me some tough questions and I came up with some answers. But so we fast forward to working for Andrew, an electrifying experience. One of the great things that he taught you right away was how fast-paced being a journalist is, right? People need answers, they're on deadline, it's a really difficult job. And so he said, a quick no is just as good as a yes. And so, if you didn't respond to an email from a journalist within 5 minutes, it was, what's going on? You on this? So you were constantly on, you learn some things while you're working for Andrew, right? So he generated ideas constantly, and he was also making deals all the time. So he would go to lunch with somebody who was, a huge name, an editor, a Washington, bureau chief, or someone who worked at a different think tank, or someone who was just in the policy world. And he would come back, he would swing by my desk, and he would grab me, he would grab Colm Quinn, and he would pull us into his office and he'd say, here's what we're doing. And he would come up with this huge thing, and we would sit there and go, all right, so we're gonna have to implement this thing and figure it out. But what the amazing thing about Andrew is you actually saw it through. So you could see an idea start in this lunch dialogue that then came out, and you would see a book. you would see a book launch, you would see all these events, and there would be a defining moment of somebody's career. He was also very funny, a couple vignettes on that. So I was young, and I decided that we were getting all these good satellite images from these satellite companies, and they contacted me, the satellite company, and they said, we want to charge this much and offer all these different services. And I said, okay, I'll set up all these meetings with the experts. We did that, and they wanted to charge the experts more money for these things. Andrew caught wind of it, and he voiced his displeasure, and he taught me another lesson, which is, he said, Brandon, this is called earned media. He goes, they can't pay to get on the cover of the New York Times, but we can get them on the cover of the New York Times. And so he ended up turning it into a thing where he was on speakerphone with them, pretending that I told them that that they said that they were going to cut us off and charge if we don't pay more money. And these guys backed away, and they said, oh, that's not what we said, that's not what we said. And we ended up walking away with like a sweetheart deal for a smaller percentage of it. Andrew is also extremely protective. There's a lot of stories I can say about that, but one of the funnier stories was I was on vacation in Florida. I was working still, just taking emails from journalists, and I got this phone call. And this guy says, this is Seymour Hersh from the New York Times. And I either blanked or never knew at that point who he was. And so he says, I want to talk about Pakistan, and I want to do it now, right? And so I called Tony Cordes a minute. I'm like, I'm doing a great thing here. I'm on vacation, I'm working. And I called Tony, and Tony answers the phone, and I go, hey, Tony, Seymour Hersh wants to talk about Pakistan. And he goes, oh, shit. and he took it, and then he writes this long email to Dr. Hamry and Craig and all these people saying what happened. And Andrew jumped in. Again, Tony didn't mean it in this way, but you could read it as in, this is like not a great thing to be talking about. And Andrew jumped in, but you're not mad at Brandon about this, right? And Tony came in with John Hamry and all these, said, no, Brandon's just doing his job. He's doing a great job. Speaking of John Hamry, Andrew, completely loyal, confident, and admiring of Dr. Hamry, who I know isn't here, but surely watched the video. And Craig Cohen, I used to know if Andrew was talking to Craig because his pass, his lanyard, would be on his desk, and he would be totally gone, and he wouldn't respond to any emails. For 2 hours on end, they were just in Craig's office talking, and it was one of the few meetings that you couldn't interrupt. And then in terms of Andrew's family, people have said it before, he talked about you constantly. There was one time, I think it was when Ben was starting to get older and had gotten on a team, probably a football team, and Andrew came to me and he said, I'm going to be leaving earlier than usual. I'm going to be heading out because, Ben's on this team, and, I was thinking about it, and I just don't want to miss it. I don't want to miss anything. And I expressed to him that, one of the things I remember about, in terms of my dad and what he did in my childhood was he never missed a game, right? And so, he loved you guys. He talked about you constantly. He also talked about you, Amy. There was one occasion where he came in and he was talking to an expert, and he said, I was so angry yesterday about this issue, whatever it was. He said, but I went home and I talked to my wife. And he goes, she's a lot cooler thinking than I am. And he goes, and she had these really good ideas. And then he presented it, and that's what we went with. Ben, Eli, Daniel, you are the best of him. Ben, looking at you, it's soon enough, right? But in a good way, man, in a great way. But more so what I see in you that from your dad is you have a way of presenting yourself with great compassion. You are in command, and you're confident, and that comes right across. Eli, it's so easy. You are the fun in your dad. I howled laughing at Eli's speech, eulogy at the funeral. You were funny. And personality goes a long way. It's why I'm here. And then Daniel, our new college freshman, who perhaps will haze later this evening. You've got the smarts, you got the drive, and you absolutely have the confidence in your own abilities, which Andrew is absolutely confident in his abilities. Amend this thing here. I have to say, Bob, it was an exciting and exhilarating time when you were doing the podcast and writing the book. Andrew had this incredible ability to not hold anything against somebody. He didn't have like a preconceived notion, or if he did, he didn't hold on to that too tightly. So there were people who you interviewed, it was all across the spectrum, and it was, I would say, a person from a very radical sort of ish outlet. And, we talked before, and he said, oh, I know what his deal is, And then he came out of it, and these guys were like best friends, arms around each other. And that was just the way he was. He didn't have real parochial interests. The last time I was at this lectern, Andrew was coming up to me with these huge eyes wide, because we had the president of Argentina here, and I was in charge of the event. I didn't stop the flow of people into the room. And there were people in the rafters, and the security were freaking out. And instead of being mad at me, Andrew just like smiles at me as I'm pleading with these Argentinians to leave the room, and they're refusing to do so. But he was just very delicate, very helpful. He was there for me. On a somber note, when I was working for Andrew, my older sister passed away under some very tragic circumstances. Andrew was the first person I called. I called him on a Saturday. I told him only 2 hours after learning. I said, hey man, I'm sorry to bother you on a Saturday. I'm not gonna be able to answer emails. My sister passed away. And it was the first time I cried for that, and I lost it. And he was there for me like a rock. He connected me with so many people who helped bring her, she was abroad, who helped me bring her home, and which is a very important thing in Judaism, to too much time doesn't go before you're buried. That's a kindness that he did that lasts forever. Andrew was visiting, the great tragedy, one of the great personal tragedy is that the day Andrew went to the hospital, he was visiting Malibu, where my family resides, and we had plans for Shabbos dinner, and so you all were gonna come. And Amy texted me on Andrew's phone saying that he'd entered the hospital. Andrew and I have talked about that moment, that night, for 8 years, and how much we looked forward to introducing him to my mom and her husband, and showing him the property there, and enjoying it. And we had all these, I moved to LA because I met my girlfriend late last year. I moved there in March, and we had planned this whole thing that every year you guys are gonna come out. And so at least I would get to see Andrew for 2-3 weeks at a time every year. It's going to be a lifelong sadness. What I hold on to is that in the days prior and in the months prior, Andrew knew how much I loved him, and I knew how much Andrew loved me. And at that point, all you can do is say thank you. Thank you for sharing Andrew with us, with me. Thank you for everything he did and all the support you gave him in helping us. I love you all, and I'm very sorry.
Amy, please. Thank you.
I did not plan on speaking today. They asked me if I wanted to. earlier, and I said, no way, this is going to be too hard. But the boys had an opportunity of speaking at the funeral, and I didn't. I couldn't imagine how you guys did it. It was incredible, but I couldn't do it. And I felt like this is an opportunity to speak now. But what I thought was so interesting is that when I think about where Andrew is, he's looking down on me. And here we are, Andrew is looking down on me. I was gonna bring my phone up here to take a selfie of myself with Andrew above me, but that seemed a little bit odd. So for 20 years, Andrew was at CSIS, 20 years this summer in July, the same month that he passed away. And CSIS was everything to him. He lived, breathed. The man was obsessed with CSIS. From the old building to the creating of this new building, he was so proud of this building. It was such an honor to be part of the construction. It just embodied everything that was Andrew, was his so much pride in CSIS. And for the people I met today and whose names I have heard so many times in the past, it was awesome to have a name with a face, and I can see the screen out there right now scrolling with pictures of Andrew, which I haven't seen, which is quite something, hey. So here we are. This is a goodbye for us. I'm not saying that there's no chance we'll ever come back to CSIS, but from the moment he started working there in 2005, before Daniel was even born, it's just been a total part of our lives. And when I look back and think of who I was when 2005, I was really young. I was so young. We both were so young when he started working at CSIS. So just the name is just going to be imprinted on our minds and on the boys forever. We also have thousands of business cards. I don't know why he has so many business cards of his own. They were everywhere. But in addition to that, for all the talk about the Jefferson, we have a collection from both his office at home and his office at work that we cleaned out. At least 100 pens the man stole from the Jefferson. That's not including the Four Seasons pens, but I've never seen anything like it. So Daniel, he's leaving to go to college on Monday, packing his bags, and I'm like, you should probably bring some pens. I don't know if you're only... So Daniel is bringing a variety of stolen pens, mostly from the Jefferson and the Four Seasons, so that he can use them in his new academic pursuits. And on a somewhat positive note, for all of you that know how much Diet Coke Andrew drank, our grocery bills are much less right now because there's no Diet Coke in our house. So if you come over and you ask for a Diet Coke, I'm going to say no. We are no longer having Diet Coke in our house. We've given enough money to the Coca-Cola business. Thank you so much for being here. This means the world to me and the boys. I know that, and to Andrew's father and stepmother Ann, and to my other family that's here. To Alex and to Craig. I mean, this is incredible. I'm sorry we don't get to see Dr. Hamry and say goodbye to him, but we will always have a very big place in our heart for CSIS. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. I was going to ask Amy to stay on stage with me because we just have two notes here before we close out the program. And I think obviously a big theme tonight was Andrew's mentorship and pioneering tactics and communications. And we're going to honor that legacy. And I'm really proud tonight to announce that we are establishing the Andrew Schwartz Fellowship at CSIS. This will be a program that's going to bring a young professional to CSIS every year. They'll work within our external relations team, learning from the same tactics that Andrew taught all of us. He'll also be mentored by our scholars, and this is going to be in perpetuity so that his commitment to mentorship continues to live on. And that's so important to us, and I know is so important to Andrew. The final thing is we're going to end on a smile tonight. By our count, Andrew wrote about 1,400 editions of the evening newsletter at CSIS. Many of you read it. We know, we're tracking. But he ended each edition with a section called Smiles. And it was in his own voice. This was, him sharing his love of music and culture and favorite spots in the world. It was really a beloved feature, and I think it was something we all loved reading every night. Over the past few weeks, our staff has gone through all of those editions, and they have pulled what I think are some of the most memorable entries into this book that we're going to give to the family tonight. I'm going to put this copy out there so that all of you can page through it. It's extraordinary. It's such a cool book, and it just goes through the years. All of Andrew's favorites: New Orleans, Dylan, Grateful Dead, and you will we'll have a QR code as well out there, so you can download a digital copy of it. But it's very special, and we'll give it to you here this evening. And I really want to thank Ava Rose and our team and Will Taylor for developing that over the past few weeks. But I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. This is a very special evening. It's very difficult, and it will remain difficult, but it has been really heartwarming for all of us to be with all of you tonight and to see just the huge community that Andrew cultivated in Washington about as well as anybody. So we thank you for coming, thank all of our speakers, and if you'll please join us in the reception area for drinks and hors d'oeuvres, we can continue the conversation. Thank you all.